Hi everyone, my name's Antony Cummins and welcome to this. The katana, is it a spiritual weapon or is it just a tool? Now when we think of samurai, we think of the katana, the longsword, and we think of the short and the longsword together. Now first thing you must know is that before the Edo period, a bit before the Edo period, when they were still in the warring period, the person who was in charge of Japan at the time, a guy called Hideyoshi, he tried to ban peasants wearing weapons. Now when we say peasants in English, we've got this idea of people with no teeth and crawling along. That's not right. These are normal, freeborn, non-slaves, non-servant. These are free people who could walk around with 2 swords, 3 swords, 7 swords, a spear, anything they wanted. The difference between samurai and non-samurai was not so sort of great, if you will. So you've got to remember this. When you think of samurai, you think katana. The katana as a symbol of samurai status only came about much later on and towards the time of peace. So that's step one. It was never the symbol of the samurai till after all the wars had finished. So of course the next thing we have to remember is that back in the day, probably the spear or the bow was the most prominent samurai weapon. And I've said it before, is the best achievement you can ever wish to gain as a samurai is Ichiban Yari, the first spear. That's the first man on a battlefield, the first man to thrust and the first man to kill. You are the dog's bollocks if you're there. That's you. So they don't say the first katana or the first sword. That never even comes into it. So how did the samurai treat their swords? Now without doubt, during the Edo period, the katana and the wakizashi together became the symbol of the samurai. That's without doubt, because the spear and all the battlefield implements sort of like fell away. They were still in use, they were still heavily practiced, but you didn't often walk around with your spear. You didn't go on campaigns and crusades against other sort of states, if you will. So how did the samurai deal with their sword? So I think myth number one is that people think the honourable samurai katana was passed down generation after generation. Now don't get me wrong, I do think katanas were passed down generation after generation. Without doubt, masterclass swords were absolutely passed down. However, what if a person has 3 sons and you have and there's only 1 katana passed down? Those 3 sons are samurai. Of course, in that situation, it would go to the eldest son. But what about the other 2 sons? What do they get? That's what we don't think about. And what about when you're having a street fight with your priceless katana that no one can afford? That's absolute rubbish. Back in the day, every samurai had a sword, and that was 10% of the population. And before that, in the warring periods, nearly everybody had a sword, or some form of big, long blade. Every free man, that is. The point is that they were taking these swords off free men, so only samurai could have it, so the samurai could continue. Therefore, the samurai under the shogun could oppress the rest of the population. So remember that. So there was lots of swords around. Now you've got to think of swords like a car. If you've got a Ferrari outside, you don't go scratching it, you're careful where you park it, you don't park it in a bad area, you pay for overnight security parking. It's the same with a good sword. If you have the equivalent of a Ferrari sword, a masterclass, mastersmith sword, you handle it with care, you make sure that thing is good. And most of the time in the Edo period, they got lots of gold and decorations and very fancy fancy and intricate works. So what that means is in the Sengoku period, these sort of priceless swords would not be used on the battlefield. Now I can't confirm that, but in the top of generals, they would have beautiful swords, but the generals didn't get into the thick of it. They didn't get into the fight. They were the ones at the back. They've done their, war and they've become generals. But the soldier, the samurai on the street is the guy with the heavy duty, heavy tuba, very bland, very blank, very hard cutting sword. So what you've got to remember that is, if you look at the car analogy, there are cars everywhere in the world. Everybody owns a car nearly, in first world countries. But you've got beat up ones, broken ones, scraped ones, not bad ones, good ones, solid ones, inferior ones, fake ones, ripped off, stolen ones. That's the same with swords. You've got Ferraris, you've got Skodas, which used to be terrible when I was a kid, but now pretty good. You've got Ladas and all them sort of crappy swords and crappy cars that are out there. So what you've got to remember is the samurai, 10% of the population are walking with these swords. 10% of the population are having 2, 3, 5, 6, 10 sons, and they have to supply them with katana, or the basics. A samurai has to have a katana. So you've got a lot of katanas going around Japan. And what the next thing I want to talk about is this idea it's a spiritual thing. Without doubt, some katana became spiritual. They were given names, they were by masterclass people, they were donated to shrines. But like swords in Western antiquity, they're broken, snapped, thrown into water as an offering to the gods, and same as a sword is given to a shrine. Beautiful masterclass sword as an offering to the gods. But the guy on the street, the guy who's doing the fighting, does not have that type of sword. He has a hard cutting, hard biting, very good, katana that is, not prestigious, but does its job, does what it says on the tin. Boom, kills people, knocks their heads off. So we always get this idea that when you get a samurai sword, you've got to do this, and there's dots of delicate ways to do it, and we hold it blade this way and all this malarkey, and then you've got your sleeve and you look at it like this, and these are not incorrect. This is absolutely correct. However, it's from an appreciative angle, if you want. These are collectors. So even in the ancient days, when people appreciating the mastery of a sword, they would not do it on bearskin, of course. They're looking at this and they're like, yeah, that is beautiful. And that's how they would deal with a sword. But a samurai is not a collector. A samurai is absolutely not a collector. He's a murderer. He's a killer. He's a knight of the realm. He's a soldier. He's a butcher. He's an educated warrior. He is not, while he may collect swords, that's not his job. That's what we do. We are not samurai. We collect swords. So what did a samurai do with his sword? How did he deal with this? Well, number one is that we all imagine samurai swords as very polished and very nice. This is a John Lee katana, by the way. It's not so expensive. I've got an original in there, but it needs polishing. So, exactly. So, that sword in there I've got needs polishing. So, did samurai have these highly polished, beautiful blades? Probably not. We know something called quick sharpening. And what this is you've got to imagine you've got a skin of an animal with certain things attached to it, usually broken flint, quartz, that type of stuff. And they would get this and scratch it. And this was, I'm not going to do it with my fingers, they would scratch this with the skin. This was quick sharpening. If you couldn't get your sword sharpened properly, or you're on a trip, or you'd cut someone down and you'd gone through them, you clean this off and you sharpen it with quick sharpening. And they state in the manuals that it's better to have scratches up and down the blade. It doesn't say don't polish them, it says better to have scratches. And of course you've got a skin of an animal, and you're scratching the blade to make sure it's sharp. Now, to add to that, what do you clean a samurai blade with? Well, I'm bringing about a school called Nato-Ryu, and if you're interested in Nato-Ryu, go find us on Facebook and all that. I'll put the links below. Now, in Nato-Ryu, what do you think we clean our swords with? And people are like, when you touch a sword, you can't breathe on a sword, you can't lick a sword, you can't put your sword in your milkshake, you can't do anything. Well, actually, Natori Masazumi says you should clean your sword with horse shit. So when you've cut someone down and you've butchered him, you may have some paper, because they also say carry paper, but what you do first is you get horse shit in the paper or on the back of your sandal and soil the horse shit, dirt, grime, crap, and you clean the blood off with this, and then you probably use your paper to clean it off properly. When you get home, without doubt you will polish, clean, make it correct. But the point being is, we've got this idea of you can't breathe near a sword. One of my friends got told off when we were at Otaki Sensei's house because he breathed near Otaki Sensei's sword. But Otaki Sensei is a collector. That's the point. He is a collector. But we're not back in samurai days. Whereas Natori is like, just clean it. Quick sharpen it with grit and sand. And then to add to this, when you've cut someone down, if it goes through a few bones and then your sword is bent because you've gone in, you've got to get it out and you've got to bang it with a small hammer. Mind you, just say quite lightly, otherwise it'll snap. So, and if you read the Taiheki, they're putting heads on the end of this and they're lifting like, oh, look at what I have killed. And in the Taiheki it says swords are bent and you literally got your foot on it, putting it back. So my point being is we have to remember that the sword, the katana, is not this spiritual weapon. It's not the ideal of the samurai, the image of the samurai. The katana becomes the logo of the samurai, if you will. But in the Sengoku period, in the warring periods, and for a brutal, down-to-earth, on-the-street samurai, this was his tool. The gods and sacred mirrors were, part of Shinto and Buddhism. This is what he killed people with. It's only later, when killing stopped, that this became an object of worship. Now, I'm not saying you could pick out lots of samples of people worshipping swords, because that's another element of it where I say they donate them to shrines, or maybe a masterclass sword is worshipped, i.e. it's given it's the Ferrari of its day and it's given the respect it's given. But for the most 99.9% of people, they've got your bog standard family car which cuts people down and does the job it's meant to do. So that's what you've got to remember about the samurai sword. My name is Antony Cummins and I'm an author and historical researcher, and if you're interested in my books, if you're interested in Shinobi, we did this, the Book of the Shinobi. This is the Ninja Bible. It was written in 1676, and that is an amazing book, to be honest. I loved redoing that. If you're interested in the samurai, go for Samurai War Stories. This is a collection of 1650s information on how to be a foot soldier and a samurai. And if you like swords in general, go for the Viking martial arts. I did this. It was an illustrated guide to the Viking martial arts, and it's a fully illustrated book from the sagas from the between 10 and 1100s. So I hope you enjoyed that. As I say, my name's Antony Cummins. I'll put anything you need down below. I've got a brand new book coming out, which will be up on pre-order in the next few months, and I'll put the link below, but you'll have to come back and see that unless it's now July 2014. Apart from that, put your comments below. What do you think about katana? Should it be just seen as a tool? Is it a spiritual weapon? Is it the identity? Is there a middle ground somewhere? In most cases, it's middle ground. And what do you think? Let's hear your comments, guys. So put it on. Let's see what you say.